The icy beam from Officer Miller's flashlight cut through the Chicago blizzard like a scalpel, landing on Carolyn Vance where she crouched behind the shipping container on Navy Pier. Her hands were blue-black with frostbite, wrapped around the last sketchbook she owned. 24 years old but carrying the weight of 40, barely 110 pounds even with 3 layers of stolen clothing. Her dark eyes, visible in the uploaded image, still held a flicker of defiance despite everything the world had taken from her. A network of scars decorated her knuckles, evidence of the nights she'd fought to keep what little she had. "I warned you last week, you worthless piece of trash." Miller's voice was knife-sharp with disgust as he snatched the sketchbook from her frozen fingers. "You're still polluting my pier. Still breathing my air. Still my problem to clean up. Welcome, my beautiful family, to today's story. I'm so grateful you're here with me. If you're new to our community or you've been here from the beginning, I want you to know how much your presence means. We're building something special together. A space where stories of resilience, love, and finding worth in a world that often overlooks us can flourish. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I truly need your support to make that happen. If this story touches your heart, if these characters speak to something within you, please hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not broken, just beautifully real. Every single subscriber helps us grow this family, and together we're proving that there's an audience for stories about people who bloom in darkness, who refuse to be invisible, who find love not despite their scars but because of their authentic courage. Your support means everything. Let's build this community together. Now let's get into the story. Carolyn struggled to stand, her frostbitten feet screaming inside shoes held together with duct tape. "I'll move. I'm nobody. Just let me keep." Miller cut her off, holding the sketchbook over the trash barrel where a small fire burned for warmth. "You know what we do with garbage that won't leave?" He dropped it into the flames. "We burn it." The pages curled and blackened. Portraits of her father. Sketches of the gallery she'd dreamed of opening. The last evidence that Carolyn Vance had ever been someone who mattered. All turning to ash. What Miller didn't know, what he couldn't see through the curtain of snow hammering down from the December sky, was that in exactly 53 seconds, a bullet-riddled black SUV worth more than most people's houses would lose its battle with the icy road along Lakeshore Drive. The driver, a 200-pound force of nature named Dante Moretti, the man they called the Iron King of Chicago's underworld, would hydroplane at 65 miles per hour as gunfire shattered his rear window. And the broken homeless woman Miller was currently destroying would make a choice that would detonate like a bomb through the entire Chicago Mafia. Because physics says a 110-pound woman suffering from hypothermia and frostbite cannot dive into 34-degree water, shatter reinforced glass with her bare hands, and drag 200 pounds of unconscious muscle to shore while bleeding from a dozen cuts. But Carolyn Vance had stopped believing in impossible a long time ago. If this story moves you, hit the like button. Share it with anyone who needs to remember that the people society throws away are often the ones who save us all. And subscribe, because Carolyn's story is just beginning. She pulled a devil from freezing water, never knowing that devil would set the world on fire to protect her in return. Miller spat into the snow near Carolyn's feet and turned away. The beam of his flashlight slashed through the blizzard one final time before disappearing into the white void. His patrol car engine growled to life. Red tail lights blurred into the storm. Then silence fell like a blanket over the pier. Carolyn stood there, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Snow accumulated in her hair, on her shoulders, in the creases of her threadbare coat. She dropped to her knees in the slush, numb fingers searching blindly for anything salvageable. The backup sketchbook was soaked through, pages fused together into a useless brick. Her only water bottle had cracked in the cold. The $5 in coins she'd collected from sketching tourist portraits, her plan to buy antibiotics for the infection burning in her chest, had rolled into a storm drain. But she picked up what remained anyway. The soggy sketchbook. The broken bottle. Because they were all she had left of being human. Her hand found the thin chain around her neck where her father's Street Christopher medal still hung. Frozen metal against frozen skin, but still there. Still proof she'd once belonged to someone. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her father's laugh, but the memory had faded like pencil marks smudged by too many tears. He'd told her she had a gift, that her art would change lives. But creating beauty didn't matter when you were dying in the cold. Living like this wasn't living at all. Carolyn was just starting to stand when the sound ripped through the night. Not wind. Not thunder. The shriek of tires losing their grip on black ice, desperate and animalistic, rubber screaming against frozen asphalt in the futile battle between control and chaos. Then metal crunched into metal. A guardrail exploded. Carolyn's head snapped up just as the black SUV tore through the barrier like it was made of paper. The massive vehicle hung suspended in the air for one impossible moment. She saw everything with terrible clarity. The reinforced body slowly rotating. Snow crystals catching the streetlights around it like diamonds. Bullet holes in the rear window. A man's silhouette slumped over the wheel. Then gravity remembered its job. The SUV plunged nose first toward the frozen Lake Michigan and struck the ice with a sound like a cannon blast. The surface shattered. Water erupted 20 feet into the air. Jagged ice sheets tilted and cracked. The vehicle's front end disappeared instantly into the black water beneath, but the rear stayed visible, chrome bumper reaching upward like a drowning hand begging for rescue. Through the spider-webbed window she saw him. Massive. Motionless. Head hanging forward. Blood on the glass. On the road above, horns blared. Someone screamed for help. She heard the words "Call 911" carried on the wind. But down here on the pier there was only Carolyn and the sinking car. 45 seconds, maybe less. That was all the time he had before the icy water filled his lungs and Lake Michigan claimed another victim. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to run. Who was she to save anyone? She couldn't even save herself. He was trash. Miller was right. She was nothing but garbage waiting to be thrown away. But her body moved anyway, one step toward the edge of the pier, then another as if something larger than fear were controlling her. Carolyn tore off her outer coat and dropped it into the snow. Then the second jacket. Then the torn gloves that barely kept her fingers from freezing. She stood there in nothing but a soaked sweater and jeans, the Chicago wind cutting through her like razors, staring at the black water waiting to swallow her whole. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know if he was good or evil. She didn't know if he deserved to live. She only knew that someone was dying in front of her, and she was the only person close enough to do anything about it. When was the last time she'd mattered to anyone? He couldn't remember. Maybe tonight she would matter. Or maybe tonight she would die in the freezing water alongside a stranger whose name she'd never learn. Either way, at least she wouldn't die as nothing. At least she wouldn't die as garbage. Carolyn Vance filled her diseased lungs with frozen air, whispered a prayer to a father who couldn't hear her anymore and ran toward the edge of Navy Pier. Then she jumped. The first time Officer Miller burned her sketches, Carolyn had begged him to stop. She'd gotten on her knees in the slush behind the Navy Pier dumpsters, fingers clasped together like she was praying to a god who'd stopped listening years ago, and she'd pleaded. She told him those drawings were all she had left of her father. All she had left of herself. Miller had laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against bone, and said that's exactly why they needed to burn. Trash doesn't get to have memories, he'd said, feeding her father's portrait into the flames. And you, sweetheart, are Chicago's most persistent piece of trash. That was 3 weeks ago. Tonight was the 4th time. Carolyn had learned to stop begging. She watched in silence as Miller held her latest sketchbook over the barrel fire, pages fluttering in the December wind like a bird trying to escape a cage. The orange light caught his face from below, turning his satisfied smile into something demonic. She could see her own reflection in his sunglasses even though it was past midnight. A hollow-eyed ghost wearing 3 layers of stolen clothing, shaking from cold and rage in equal measure. You know what your problem is, Vance? Miller flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately, making sure she saw each drawing before he destroyed it. A portrait of the woman who ran the soup kitchen on Thursdays. A sketch of the Chicago skyline at dawn. The architectural plans for the art gallery she'd designed when she still believed in futures. You keep acting like you're still a person. Like you matter. The sketchbook dropped into the flames. Carolyn's hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging crescents into her palms through the fingerless gloves. He wanted to scream. Wanted to fight. Wanted to shove Miller into his own fire and watch him burn the way he'd burned every shred of dignity she had left. But people like her didn't get to fight back. People like her only got to survive. That's the last one, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind howling off Lake Michigan. That was the last sketchbook I had. Good. Miller tapped ash from his sleeve like he'd just finished a cigarette instead of destroying someone's soul. Maybe now you'll finally get the message and move to a different district. Preferably a different city. Hell, preferably a different state. I have nowhere else to go. Not my problem. He kicked the barrel closer to her makeshift shelter, a lean-to constructed from a shipping pallet and a tarp she'd salvaged from a construction site. The flames licked dangerously close to the plastic. Chicago's got an image to maintain. The tourists who drop money at Navy Pier don't want to see human garbage littering the waterfront. They want to see the pretty lights and the Ferris wheel and all that postcard bullshit. Carolyn's father used to bring her to this pier every Sunday when she was small. They'd get hot chocolate and sketch the boats in the harbor, and he'd tell her about the gallery they'd open together someday. How her art would hang on pristine white walls. How people would pay thousands of dollars for a glimpse of how she saw the world. He'd never mentioned that one bad deal with the wrong people could destroy everything. That his debts would become her debts. That the collector named Raymond Voss would take her apartment, her savings, her identity, and leave her with nothing but a target on her back and winter approaching fast. You're still here. Miller's voice cut through her memories like a blade through paper. That wasn't a request, Vance. That was an order. Now. She looked at the flames consuming her final sketchbook, pages curling black at the edges. 24 years of life, and this was what remained. No home. No family. No proof she'd ever been Carolyn Vance, promising young artist, beloved daughter, human being worth remembering. Just another invisible ghost haunting Chicago's frozen streets. I'm leaving, she whispered. But they both knew she was lying. She had nowhere left to go. The water was black as oil and twice as deadly. Carolyn stood at the edge of Navy Pier, toes hanging over concrete still warm from yesterday's sun, watching the SUV sink into Lake Michigan like a stone dropped into ink. 40 seconds had passed since impact. Maybe less. Time moved strangely when you were deciding whether to die. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? A decision to die. Her body temperature was already dangerously low. She could feel it in the way her thoughts moved sluggishly like wading through mud. The hypothermia had been creeping up on her for weeks, turning her fingers blue-black, making her heart stutter in her chest like a broken metronome. The infection in her lungs burned with every breath. Diving into 34-degree water would finish what Chicago's winter had started. She would die in that lake. The rational part of her brain, the part that sounded like her father, always logical, always careful, screamed at her to step back. To run. To save herself. But save herself for what? Another night shivering behind dumpsters? Another morning waking up to find frostbite had claimed another toe? Another encounter with Miller burning away the last evidence that Carolyn Vance had ever been human? The SUV's rear bumper slipped lower. Water poured through the shattered windows. She could see the man inside now, slumped against the steering wheel, blood mixing with lake water. His chest rose once. Fell. Rose again. Still breathing. Still fighting. Still alive when she was already dead. That's what Miller didn't understand. What none of them understood. You didn't have to stop breathing to be dead. Carolyn had died 3 months ago when Raymond Voss took her apartment keys and smiled while doing it. Had died when the bank froze her accounts to pay her father's debts. Had died every single night she'd gone to sleep hungry and woken up colder. This body walking around was just a ghost too stubborn to lie down. 30 seconds now. The man's head lolled to the side. Even from here she could see he was massive, 6-foot-something, shoulders like a linebacker, the kind of build that probably intimidated everyone he met. The kind of man who'd never spent a single night wondering where his next meal would come from. Who'd never had a cop burn his memories for sport. Why should she save him? He was probably rich. Definitely powerful. That SUV cost more than most people made in 5 years. Men like that didn't end up in situations like this unless they'd done something to deserve it. Maybe he was a criminal. Maybe he'd hurt people. Maybe the world would be better off letting the lake have him. But then again, the world would definitely be better off without her, and here she still was. 20 seconds. The water had reached the headrests now. The man's face was turning blue. His chest had stopped moving. Carolyn's hand found the Street Christopher medal around her neck. Her father had given it to her on her 16th birthday, told her the patron saint of travelers would keep her safe on whatever journey life took her on. Some journey this had turned out to be. Some protection. But her father had also told her something else, Something she'd forgotten until this exact moment, standing at the edge with death waiting in the water below. He'd said that art wasn't about creating beauty. It was about seeing worth in things other people had thrown away. About finding the extraordinary in the discarded. Maybe that applied to people too. Maybe it applied to her. The SUV's bumper disappeared beneath the surface. Just churning black water remained. 10 seconds until the man's lungs filled. 10 seconds until it was too late. Carolyn Vance had nothing left to live for. No home. No hope. No future worth surviving for. But maybe she had something worth dying for. She kicked off her shoes and dove. The cold hit Carolyn like a fist to the chest, driving every molecule of air from her lungs. Lake Michigan in December wasn't water. It was liquid death, a freezing void that immediately began shutting down her body system by system. Her muscles seized. Her vision blurred. Somewhere in the back of her dying brain, a voice screamed that she'd made a terrible mistake. But her arms kept moving. She kicked downward, following the shadow of the SUV as it descended into darkness. 5 feet down. 10. The pressure built in her ears until she thought her skull would crack. Her fingers found metal, the roof of the vehicle, and she pulled herself along it, searching desperately for the window. There. Shattered glass, edges like knives. She grabbed the frame and pulled herself to the driver's side door. The man was there, eyes closed, face pressed against the steering wheel. Blood ribboned from a gash on his forehead, creating dark clouds in the water. His chest was still. Not moving. Not breathing. Dead, the rational part of her brain whispered. He's already dead. You're killing yourself for a corpse. Carolyn grabbed his collar anyway and pulled. He didn't move. She tried again, planting her feet against the doorframe, using every ounce of strength in her malnourished body. The man shifted maybe an inch. He was enormous, easily twice her weight, all of it muscle and bone, and impossible mass. Physics didn't care about desperation. A 110-pound woman couldn't move a 200-pound man. Her lungs were screaming now. Black spots danced across her vision. She had maybe 10 seconds before her body gave up and inhaled water whether she wanted to or not. The seat belt. She could see it now, locked across his chest. Her frozen fingers fumbled for the release button. Once. Twice. The mechanism was jammed or broken, or she was too weak, or all three at once. 5 seconds. Carolyn braced her shoulder against the man's chest and shoved with everything she had left. The button clicked. The belt released. The man slumped forward into her arms, and suddenly they were both sinking, his weight dragging them deeper into the black. Bo. She kicked upward. Her legs felt like lead. The man's jacket was slippery in her grip, threatening to slide free. She wrapped both arms around his chest from behind, locked her hands together and kicked again. They rose maybe a foot. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The surface might as well have been a mile away. Her body was shutting down. She could feel it happening, the hypothermia stealing her coordination, her strength, her will to fight. This was how she died. Drowned in Lake Michigan, holding a stranger who was already gone. But then her father's voice cut through the fog. You're stronger than you think, Carolina. You always have been. Carolyn kicked. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, dragging in air that burned like fire in her frozen lungs. The man's face was still underwater. She twisted, getting his head above the surface, and kicked toward the pier. Every movement was agony. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs threatened to quit entirely. The concrete edge appeared through the snow. She grabbed it with one hand, somehow, miraculously, keeping the man's head above water with the other. Then she was pulling, dragging, hauling 200 pounds of dead weight up and over the edge through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. They collapsed onto the pier together. Carolyn rolled him onto his back. His lips were blue. No pulse in his neck. Not breathing. She'd pulled a corpse from the lake. Her frozen hands found his chest and she started compressions. 1, 2, 3. She had no idea if she was doing it right. Had never been trained. But she kept going anyway because stopping meant accepting that she'd killed herself for nothing. 15 compressions. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose and breathed into his mouth. His chest rose. Fell. Nothing. 15 more compressions. Her arms were shaking so hard she could barely maintain the rhythm. Another breath. Nothing. Come on, she whispered through chattering teeth. Come on, you bastard. Don't you dare make me die for nothing. Third round. Compressions. Breath. The man convulsed. Water poured from his mouth. He coughed, a horrible rattling sound, and his chest began to rise and fall on its own. Alive. Carolyn sat back on her heels, staring at him through the falling snow. She'd done it. Against physics, against reason, against every odds stacked against her, she'd actually done it. Sirens wailed in the distance. Getting closer. She looked at the man one more time, his expensive suit, his gold watch, the tattoo of a crown visible beneath his torn collar, and then she ran. Because people like her didn't stick around for questions. People like her were ghosts. And ghosts didn't get happy endings just because they saved someone's life. Dante Moretti woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the knowledge that someone had dared to let him almost die. His eyes snapped open. White ceiling tiles. Fluorescent lights. The rhythmic beep of a heart monitor that confirmed what his body already knew. He was alive when he absolutely shouldn't be. His chest felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. His lungs burned with every breath. The gash on his forehead throbbed in time with his pulse. But he was breathing. His heart was beating. Someone had pulled him from that car. Mr. Moretti. The voice came from his left. Marco, his second in command, looking like he'd aged a decade in however many hours Dante had been under. Thank Christ. The doctors said. Who saved me? Dante's voice came out rough as gravel, his throat raw from lake water and death. He tried to sit up. Pain exploded across his ribs. Definitely broken. He sat up anyway. So you need to rest. You nearly. Who? Saved. Me. Each word was a blade. Dante Moretti didn't ask questions twice. He didn't need to. People answered or they learned what happened when the Iron King lost his patience. Marco shifted his weight, uncomfortable. That alone told Dante something was wrong. Marco had seen him execute traitors with his bare hands without flinching. Whatever he was about to say, it was worse than blood. We don't know. The silence that followed could have cut glass. You don't know, Dante repeated slowly, dangerously. The Blackwood Syndicate put 6 bullets in my car. Forces me off Lakeshore Drive into the fucking lake in December. Someone pulls my 200-pound ass out of a sinking vehicle and performs CPR well enough to bring me back from the dead. And you don't know who. By the time our guys got there, you were alone on the pier. Unconscious but breathing. Whoever saved you was gone. Marco pulled out his phone, brought up security footage. Pier cameras caught this 30 seconds before the ambulance arrived. Dante watched the grainy video. A figure, small, wrapped in inadequate layers, running from the pier into the blizzard. Moving fast despite an obvious limp. The footage was too distant, the snow too thick to make out features. But he could see enough. The figure was slight. Probably female. Definitely alone. Rewind it. Marco obeyed. Dante watched the figure kneel beside his body. His corpse, because that's what he'd been, and start chest compressions. Even through the poor quality footage he could see her arms shaking. Could see her collapse forward after breathing into his mouth. Exhausted before forcing herself to try again. She'd been dying herself. He could see it in the way she moved. And she'd saved him anyway. Find her, Dante said quietly. The quiet was worse than shouting. Marco knew it. Everyone who worked for the Iron King knew it. Sir, we've canvassed the area. No witnesses. No. I don't care if you have to knock on every door in Chicago. I don't care if you have to bribe every cop and check every camera feed in the city. Find her. Dante swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed. His vision swam. He ignored it. She saved my life. That means she's either stupid, suicidal, or she wants something. I need to know which. Or maybe she was just a good person. The words came from Dr. Chin, who'd been silent in the corner until now. She was one of the few people brave enough, or stupid enough, to speak to Dante like he was human instead of a force of nature. Maybe she saved you because you were drowning and she was there. Dante looked at her with eyes that had ordered men buried alive. Nobody does something for nothing, doctor. Especially not in my world. She pulled me out of that water for a reason and I'm going to find out what it is. He stood, ripping the fur from his arm. Blood dripped onto the pristine hospital floor. There's something else, Marco said reluctantly. We found traces on your jacket. From whoever grabbed you. And charcoal residue. Like from artists' pencils. And Marco hesitated. Your tactical team said you smelled like rain when they pulled you out. Not lake water. Rain. Like whoever touched you had been standing in it for hours. Charcoal and rain. Dante closed his eyes and he was back in the water, lungs full of death, consciousness fading. But underneath the cold and the dark there'd been something else. A presence. Hands that refused to let go even when letting go would have been easier. A voice whispering, "Don't you dare make me die for nothing." She'd been willing to die for him. Nobody had been willing to die for Dante Moretti since his mother put herself between him and his father's fists 20 years ago. Find her, he repeated. I don't care what it takes. Find the woman who smells like charcoal and rain. Find her before someone else does. Because the Blackwood Syndicate would be looking too. And they didn't leave witnesses alive. Carolyn woke to voices arguing over whether she was already dead. Check her pulse again. Boss said find her alive. She's been out here for days, Vic, look at her. She's fucking frozen. Then we bring him a corpse and you explain to Dante Moretti why his miracle girl is a popsicle. Your call. Rough hands pressed against her neck, searching for a heartbeat. Carolyn tried to move, to speak, to do anything that proved she was still in there somewhere. Her body refused. The hypothermia had finally won. She could feel it. The way her thoughts moved through molasses. The way her limbs had stopped shivering because they'd given up entirely. This was what dying felt like. Quiet. Almost peaceful. The hands pulled away. Christ. He's got a pulse. Barely. Get her to the car. Now. She felt herself being lifted, and distantly registered surprise that she weighed so little these days that one man could carry her like a child. The abandoned warehouse she'd been hiding in, her fortress for the last 3 nights since the pier, disappeared above her. Then she was in warmth. Artificial heat blasting from car vents. Someone wrapped her in something soft. A coat maybe. Or a blanket. She's not breathing right. Her lips are blue. Just drive. Giovanni's got medical on standby at the estate. Estate. The word filtered through Carolyn's dying brain. She wanted to fight, to run, to explain that she didn't want anything from whoever these men were. But her body had quit taking orders days ago. The last thing she remembered before the darkness took her completely was a voice on a phone saying, "Yeah, boss. We found her. Your water wraith is real." When consciousness returned, it came in pieces. Warmth first. Real warmth, the kind she'd forgotten existed. Then softness. Sheets against her skin that felt like clouds compared to the cardboard and concrete she'd known for months. The smell of clean linen and something medicinal. The distant sound of voices speaking in Italian. Carolyn's eyes opened to a ceiling that belonged in a museum. Ornate molding. A chandelier dripping crystal. Cream-colored walls that probably cost more to paint than she'd made in her entire life. This wasn't a hospital. This was somewhere worse. He tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt like it had been shredded and reassembled wrong. Her lungs burned. Her fingers and toes throbbed with the special agony of frostbite being treated. And 4 ran into her left arm. Bandages covered both hands. Easy. A woman appeared at her bedside, 50s, professional, wearing scrubs. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your core temperature was 89 degrees when they brought you in. Another hour and you would have died. 2 days. Carolyn's mind raced. Where? Mr. Moretti's estate. North Shore. You're safe here. Safe. The word was a joke. Carolyn had been around long enough to know that men who lived in estates and sent enforcers to find people weren't offering safety. They were collecting debts. I need to leave. Carolyn pulled at the 4. The woman caught her wrist with surprising strength. You need to heal. You have pneumonia, severe frostbite on 8 fingers and 4 toes, malnutrition, and about a dozen other conditions that will kill you if you try to walk out of here. The woman's voice softened. Mr. Moretti wants to speak with you when you're stronger. Until then, my orders are to keep you alive. I don't want his money. I don't want anything. You saved his life. The woman released Carolyn's wrist but didn't move away. In our world, that means something. Whether you want it to or not. Our world. As if Carolyn had any choice about which world she belonged to now. The door opened. A man entered, not the one from the lake but someone who radiated the same dangerous authority. Expensive suit. Cold eyes. The kind of man who'd killed people and slept fine afterward. She's awake. Good. He pulled out his phone, typed something. The boss is on his way. Carolyn's heart stuttered. I don't want to see him. Tell him I don't want anything. The man smiled, and it wasn't kind. What you want stopped mattering the second you jumped into that lake, sweetheart. You're part of this now. Dante Moretti doesn't forget debts, and you just became the biggest one he's ever owed. He left. The door clicked shut with the finality of a cell closing. The woman returned to checking Carolyn's vitals, professional and detached. The clothes you were wearing are being burned. They were contaminated and falling apart. There are new things in the closet. Mr. Moretti had them brought in yesterday. Carolyn looked at the 4 in her arm. The pristine bandages. The silk sheets she was lying on. This wasn't rescue. This was capture dressed up in expensive wrapping paper. She'd saved a man's life and somehow lost her own in the process. Chapter 6. Carolyn waited until the medical woman left before she tried the window. Her legs shook as she crossed the room, 20 feet that felt like 20 miles. The hardwood floor was heated, warm against her bandaged feet. Everything in this place radiated wealth the way a furnace radiated heat. The bed she'd been sleeping in probably cost more than her father's entire art studio. The window overlooked manicured gardens dusted with fresh snow, grounds that stretched so far she couldn't see the property line. She was in a prison made of silk and crystal. The window was locked. Of course it was. Carolyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried not to panic. 3 stories up. Even if she could get it open, jumping would break both legs at minimum. And then what? Run through the snow in a hospital gown with frostbitten toes and pneumonia rattling in her chest? I wouldn't recommend it. The voice came from the doorway, a woman's voice younger than the medical staff, tinged with amusement. Marco's got guys patrolling the grounds every 20 minutes. You'd make it maybe 50 yards. Carolyn spun around. The woman leaning against the doorframe was probably mid-30s, stunning in the effortless way of people who'd never worried about where their next meal came from. Dark hair pulled into a ponytail, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. She held a tray with soup and bread that smelled like heaven. I'm Sophia, Dante's sister. She set the tray on the side table. And before you ask, no, I can't help you escape. Yes, my brother is terrifying. And yes, you really do need to eat something before you pass out again. I don't want to be here. Yeah, I got that from the way you were eyeing the window like it was your last hope. Sophia sat in the chair by the bed, utterly at ease in a way that made Carolyn feel like a cornered animal. But here's the thing, you saved Dante's life. Do you understand what that means in our world? I don't care about your world. Carolyn's voice came out sharper than intended. Fear made it sharp. I didn't save him for money or favors or whatever debt he thinks I'm owed. I saved him because he was drowning and I was there. That's it. That's all. Sophia studied her with eyes that were uncomfortably perceptive. You jumped into Lake Michigan in December knowing you'd probably die. Nobody does that for, that's it. You wanted something. Even if it was just to matter for 5 seconds before you froze to death. The words hit too close. Carolyn looked away. He's killed people, she whispered. I know who Dante Moretti is. Everyone in Chicago knows. The Iron King. The man who buried 3 rival bosses alive for trying to move product through his territory. I saved a monster. You saved my brother. Sophia's voice lost its lightness. Yeah, he's done terrible things. He'll do more terrible things before he's done. But he's also the reason I'm alive. The reason our mother got to die in a bed instead of a gutter. The reason 50 families in Little Italy don't get shaken down by the Blackwood Syndicate. She paused. Monsters are complicated. You should know that. You've been living as one of society's monsters for months now. That's different. Is it? People looked at you and saw trash. Saw someone not worth saving. Officer Miller burned your art because he genuinely believed you didn't deserve to have memories. To him, you were a monster that needed to be exterminated. Sophia stood, moved to the window. Dante looks at you and sees someone who gave up her own life to save his. Someone worth more than he could ever repay. Which version of you is real? Carolyn had no answer for that. He wants to meet you, Sophia continued. Tonight. And I know you're terrified, but I promise you he's not going to hurt you. He's not going to force you to stay. He just wants to understand why you did it. And if I refuse? Then you refuse. The door isn't locked. The gate guards have orders to let you leave if you ask. Sophia headed for the door then paused. But you should know. The Blackwood Syndicate knows someone pulled Dante from that car. They're looking for you too. And they're not going to wrap you in silk sheets and offer you soup. She left. The door clicked shut. Carolyn stared at it for a long moment then walked over and tried the handle. It opened easily. The hallway beyond was empty except for expensive art on the walls. Sophia was right. She could leave. Walk right out of this golden cage and back to the streets where at least she understood the rules. Where men like Officer Miller were predictable in their cruelty. Where she could freeze to death in peace without owing anyone anything. Her hand stayed on the doorknob. But she didn't open it. Because the Blackwood Syndicate was out there. And pneumonia was in her lungs. And somewhere in this mansion was a man who wanted to know why a homeless girl had decided his life was worth dying for. Maybe she wanted to know the answer to that question too. Carolyn closed the door and went to eat the soup before it got cold. Dante Moretti entered the room like a storm given human form. 6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a custom suit that probably cost more than a car. Carolyn had seen him unconscious, blue-lipped and dying. Awake he was something else entirely. The kind of presence that made the air feel thinner, that made every survival instinct she had scream at her to run. She stayed in the chair by the window, soup bowl clutched in her bandaged hands like a shield. You're smaller than I expected. His voice was rough, probably still damaged from the lake water. He stayed near the door, studying her with eyes that missed nothing. The footage made you look less breakable. Sorry to disappoint. Carolyn set the bowl down before he could see how badly her hands were shaking. You didn't. He moved closer and she forced herself not to flinch. You pulled 200 pounds of dead weight out of freezing water with hypothermia and malnutrition. The doctor said your core temperature was so low you shouldn't have been able to move, much less perform CPR. So no. You're not disappointing at all. Silence stretched between them. Carolyn could hear her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. I'm told you don't want to be here, Dante said finally. That you tried the window. That Sophia had to convince you to stay long enough to eat. I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something from me. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, set it on the table between them. That's $5 million in bearer bonds. Untraceable. No taxes. No strings. Take it and disappear. Go anywhere in the world you want. Start over. Carolyn stared at the envelope like it was a snake. $5 million. Enough to pay off her father's debts 100 times over. Enough to buy a new identity, a gallery, a life where Officer Miller couldn't find her to burn her sketches. Enough to never be cold or hungry or invisible again. No. The word came out before she'd fully decided to say it. But once it was out there she realized it was the only word that made sense. Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Surprise maybe. Or suspicion. You're refusing $5 million. Yes. Why? Because I didn't save you for money. Carolyn stood, her legs still shaky but holding. I saved you because you were dying and I was there. Taking money for that would make it a transaction. Would make me. She struggled for the words. It would make me the same as everyone else who looks at a person and sees a price tag. Noble. Dante's voice was flat. Stupid but noble. Maybe both. Carolyn met his eyes, forced herself to hold his gaze even though every instinct screamed that you didn't look at apex predators directly. People have been putting price tags on me for months. The debt collectors who wanted $40,000 for my father's mistakes. The shelters that charged $20 a night I didn't have. Miller who thought I was trash worth burning. I won't do that to someone else. Not even you. Especially not me. Dante moved to the window, looked out at his empire of snow-covered grounds. You know what I am. What I've done. Sophia told you. I know you're alive. That's all that mattered that night. He turned back to her and for the first time since entering, he looked something other than perfectly controlled. He looked confused. I've had people try to kill me. Betray me. Use me. But nobody's ever refused payment before. Nobody's ever looked at Dante Moretti and decided his life was worth saving for free. I wasn't saving Dante Moretti. I was saving a man who was drowning. Carolyn's voice cracked. I didn't know about the money or the power or any of it. I just knew that if I didn't jump someone would die. And I felt like I'm dying for so long that I couldn't stand to watch someone else actually do it. The silence that followed felt like standing on a precipice. You jumped into that lake to die, Dante said quietly. It wasn't a question. Carolyn didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. And somewhere between hitting that water and dragging me to shore, you decided to live instead. He picked up the envelope, held it out again. Take the money. Not as payment. As a gift. From someone who understands what it means to choose life when death would be easier. I can't. Can't or won't. Both. Carolyn wrapped her arms around herself. If I take it, then that night becomes about the money. Stops being the one good thing I've done in 6 months and becomes just another transaction. I need it to mean something. I need to have mattered for a reason that can't be bought. Dante stared at her for a long moment, then did something she didn't expect. He laughed. Not the cruel laugh of Officer Miller, but something genuine. Almost warm. You're either the most honest person I've ever met or the best con artist in Chicago. He pocketed the envelope. I'm honestly not sure which. Does it matter? No. He moved toward the door, then paused. You can leave whenever you want. The gate guards have orders. But if you stay even for a few days while you heal, I'd like to know why you did it. The real reason. I told you. You told me what you think I want to hear. But someone who's given up on life doesn't fight that hard to save someone else. There's something you're not saying. He left before she could respond, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt less like a cage and more like a choice. Carolyn looked at the space where the envelope had been, where $5 million had sat for 30 seconds before she'd refused it. Maybe she really was the stupidest person in Chicago. Or maybe for the first time in months, she'd done something that couldn't be reduced to a price tag. Dante found her 3 days later in the library, turning his dead mother's books into something beautiful. He'd been looking for a file Marco had left on the side table when he saw her, curled into the leather armchair by the window, completely absorbed in sketching. She didn't hear him enter. Didn't notice him standing in the doorway watching her hand move across the page with the kind of focus people usually reserved for prayer. The pneumonia was better. He could tell from the way she breathed, deeper and easier than when she'd first woken up. The frostbite bandages were smaller now, revealing fingers that were scarred but healing. Sophia had convinced her to accept actual clothes. Jeans and a sweater that hung loose on her frame but were clean and warm. She looked almost human again instead of the half-frozen ghost his men had pulled from that warehouse. You're an artist. His voice made her jump, the pencil skittering across the page and ruining whatever she'd been working on. I was. Carolyn closed the sketchbook quickly, protective. Before you became invisible. Dante moved into the room, deliberately casual. He'd learned that she spooked easily, like a stray cat that had been kicked too many times. Hey, I see. She hesitated, then slowly held out the sketchbook. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from cold this time, from the vulnerability of showing someone her soul. Dante took it carefully like it was something precious. Because to her he was beginning to understand it was. The first page was a portrait of Sophia, captured in the middle of laughing at something. Every line was confident, economical. She'd caught not just Sophia's features but something essential about her. The warmth that existed underneath the designer clothes and Mafia princess exterior. He turned the page. Marco looking suspicious and dangerous. The medical woman, gentle-eyed despite her stern expression. The view from the bedroom window, snow falling through bare tree branches. And then near the back, a portrait of himself. Dante stared at it. She'd drawn him from memory from that moment in the lake. Eyes closed, face peaceful despite the blood and water. But she hadn't drawn him as a corpse. She'd drawn him as someone sleeping, someone dreaming, someone who might wake up to something better than drowning. She'd drawn him as human. You made these in 3 days? His voice came out rougher than intended. I needed something to do. Sophia brought me the pencils and paper. Said the boredom would kill me faster than the pneumonia. Carolyn reached for the sketchbook. I can stop if you don't want me using your mother's library. No. Dante held on to it, still studying the portrait of himself. These are remarkable. Your father taught you. He was going to. Before he died. Before the debts. She looked away out the window. We were supposed to open a gallery together. The Vance collection. Stupid dream. Why stupid? Because people like me don't get galleries. We get cardboard boxes under bridges and cops who burn our work for fun. Dante set the sketchbook down carefully on the side table. When Officer Miller burned your sketches, what were you drawing? Does it matter? Humor me. Carolyn was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Faces. The people everyone else doesn't see. The woman at the soup kitchen who always gave me extra bread even though she wasn't supposed to. The kid who buskied for change outside the train station and let me share his corner when it rained. The old man who died in the shelter next to me and nobody even asked his name. She turned to look at Dante directly, and there was something fierce in her eyes now, something that reminded him why this fragile woman had jumped into a frozen lake. Miller said trash doesn't get to have memories. But those people weren't trash. They were human beings who mattered and someone needed to remember they existed. So I drew them. Every face I could before I forgot. Dante felt something shift in his chest. An uncomfortable feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Him maybe. Or recognition. Show me, he said. What? The people you drew. Describe them. I can't give you back the sketches Miller burned, but I can listen. Someone should know their stories. Carolyn stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Why would you care about homeless people in Chicago? Because you do. And I'm trying to understand why someone who the world treated like garbage still believed people were worth saving. He sat down in the chair across from her. So tell me. Start with the woman from the soup kitchen. And slowly, hesitantly she did. She talked for an hour, maybe more. Describing faces and stories, the small kindnesses that kept people alive on the streets. Dante listened to every word, watching the way she came alive when she talked about her art. The way the brokenness faded and something bright and fierce took its place. This was who Carolyn Vance had been before the world tried to erase her. Before debt collectors and corrupt cops and winter cold had ground her down to nothing. An artist who saw beauty in things other people called trash. When she finally stopped talking, exhausted but more animated than he'd seen her, Dante made a decision. I have a proposition. Her walls went back up immediately. I told you I don't want. Not money. A job. He gestured to the walls of the library, covered in expensive art that had been his mother's pride. This estate has 17 rooms and exactly 0 pieces that mean anything to me. They're investments. Status symbols. Things people are supposed to admire. He looked at her sketchbook. I want you to fill them with something real. Something that matters. People who exist even if society pretends they don't. You want to commission me. Her voice was flat with disbelief. I want to give you what you lost. Purpose. A reason to pick up a pencil that isn't just survival. Dante stood. Think about it. You can still leave whenever you want. But if you stay as an artist. Not a charity case. Not someone who owes me. Just someone who makes the world see what I'm finally starting to. He left her there in the library, surrounded by his mother's books and her own sketches, looking utterly bewildered. But when he glanced back from the doorway, she'd already opened the sketchbook again. Her hand was moving across the page, creating something new. The Blackwood Syndicate came for Dante on a Tuesday, which Carolyn would later think was oddly mundane. For the night everything changed. She was in the library working on a portrait series when the first gunshot shattered the evening quiet. The pencil fell from her hand. For one frozen moment she was back under the bridge with Officer Miller, back in the lake drowning, back in every moment when violence had reminded her how fragile survival really was. Then Sophia burst through the door, gun in hand, face hard with the kind of calm that came from growing up in a world where shootouts were just another Tuesday. With me. Now. She grabbed Carolyn's arm, already moving. They're here for Dante, but they'll take you too if they find you. Who? The people who put his car in the lake. They know about you now. Know you're the reason their hit failed. They ran through hallways Carolyn had spent a week learning, Sophia navigating by instinct while gunfire echoed from the front of the estate. Marco's voice shouted orders in Italian. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Sophia shoved her into what looked like a wine cellar. Stay here. Don't come out until... Sophia. Marco's voice urgent. They're coming through the east wing. We need you. Sophia looked between Carolyn and the doorway, torn. Then she pressed her gun into Carolyn's hands. Safety's off. Point and squeeze if anyone comes through that door who isn't family. She was gone before Carolyn could protest. Carolyn sat in the dark cellar, holding a weapon she'd never fired, listening to the sounds of men killing each other one floor above. This was Dante's world. This was what she'd saved from the lake, violence and blood and the kind of power that made people want you dead. She should run. The cellar probably had another exit. She could disappear into the Chicago night, back to being invisible, back to being safe through insignificance. Her hands tightened on the gun. Safe? That was a joke. She hadn't been safe since the debt collectors took her apartment. Hadn't been safe when Miller burned her art. Hadn't been safe freezing in that warehouse. The only time she'd felt even remotely protected was here, in this house of beautiful violence, with a man who'd looked at her sketches and seen an artist instead of trash. Carolyn stood up and headed for the stairs. She found them in the main hall. Dante and Marco and Sophia and 6 of Dante's men in a standoff with twice that many Blackwood soldiers. Blood on the marble floors. Bodies that weren't moving anymore. Dante had a cut above his eye, his suit jacket torn, but he stood in the center like a king surveying a battlefield he knew he'd win. Across from him, a man Carolyn didn't recognize held a gun to a young woman's head. One of the house staff, crying silently, terrified. "You should have died in that lake, Moretti." The man's voice carried the particular cruelty of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "Would have saved us all this trouble. But I didn't die. Thanks to someone far braver than you'll ever be." Dante's eyes flicked to the staircase where Carolyn stood frozen. Something changed in his expression. Fear maybe. "Let Maria go, Castellano. Your fight is with me. My fight is with everyone under your protection. Starting with the homeless bitch who pulled you out." Castellano smiled, following Dante's gaze until he saw Carolyn. "There she is. The famous water wraith. Doesn't look like much, does she? Leave her out of this." Dante's voice dropped to something lethal. "Last warning." "Or what? You'll kill me? I'm dead anyway if I go back without finishing this." Castellano shoved Maria aside and aimed his gun at Carolyn. "But at least I can take your little savior with me." Everything happened in seconds that felt like hours. Dante moved, faster than Carolyn thought possible for a man his size. Marco and Sophia moved with him, a coordinated violence that spoke of years fighting together. Gunfire erupted. Carolyn dropped behind the banister, heart hammering, Sophia's gun clutched uselessly in her hands. When the shooting stopped, Castellano was on the ground with Dante's knee on his chest and Dante's gun pressed against his temple. "You made a mistake coming here," Dante said quietly. "But your biggest mistake was threatening someone under my permanent protection." He looked up at Carolyn, still crouched behind the banister. "Carolyn Vance saved my life. That makes her family. That makes her untouchable. And anyone who comes for her comes for me." He pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was deafening. Dante stood, stepping over the body like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. He looked at his remaining men, at the Blackwood soldiers who'd surrendered, at Marco and Sophia who were already on their phones calling cleaners. "Spread the word," he said. "Every family, every crew, every two-bit operation in this city. Carolyn Vance is under the protection of the Iron King. She is not to be touched, threatened, or looked at wrong. She is mine." He paused. "And I pay my debts." Then he crossed to the stairs, took the gun gently from Carolyn's shaking hands and helped her stand. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "You killed him." Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "I did. And I'll kill anyone else who tries to hurt you." He studied her face. "Does that terrify you?" "It should. She should be running, screaming, anything but standing here looking at a man who'd just executed someone in cold blood and feeling safer than she had in months." "No," Carolyn whispered. "It doesn't." And that's when she realized she'd stopped being a homeless girl who'd saved a stranger. She'd become something else entirely. Someone who mattered enough to kill for. Someone who finally, impossibly, belonged. Carolyn Vance jumped into freezing water with nothing to live for and came out with everything to fight for. She was the girl the world called trash, the invisible ghost Officer Miller tried to erase, the broken artist who refused to let death be meaningless. And in saving the Iron King of Chicago, she discovered something the streets had almost stolen from her, that even people society throws away can become someone's entire world. But this is just the beginning of Carolyn and Dante's story. What happens when the woman who believes everyone deserves to be saved falls for the man who believes some people deserve to burn? When the artist who sees beauty in the discarded tries to find it in a killer's soul. When the Blackwood Syndicate returns with an army, and Carolyn realizes that saving Dante's life means learning to fight for her own. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because Carolyn's journey from the frozen pier to the heart of Chicago's underworld is far from over. She saved a devil from drowning. Now she has to decide if she can save him from himself. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Share this with anyone who needs to be reminded that the most broken people can become the strongest, that mercy can be more powerful than violence, and that sometimes the person who saves you is the one who needed saving all along. Drop a comment telling me, would you have jumped into that lake? Would you have refused the $5 million? What would you do if you were Carolyn Vance?